What's wrong with you people?
Welcome to Not Another Baptist Podcast. Kyle, I got a question for you.
Okay, what's up?
Did you know that more than 90% of the students at Texas Baptist College graduate debt-free?
I did not know that. That's pretty
Now you
incredible.
do. At TBC, there are many scholarship and financial aid opportunities available. Thanks to the generosity of Southern Baptist, they're also able to offer a discounted tuition rate to members of Southern Baptist churches. And so to learn more about the undergraduate studies at Texas Baptist College, you can visit texasbaptistcollege.com/admissions. And Kyle, once again, how does it feel to be a World Series champion?
Hey, it still has not worn off because the Rangers are still World Series champions. But you may have seen this. The big news in baseball yesterday is that Ron Washington, former manager of the Texas Rangers, is going to manage the evil empire on the West Coast.
Actually, the big news in baseball yesterday was that a major stomach bug has struck the wings or whatever they call it, and we're about as sick as a dog. And so I think they ended it, actually. So anyway, I guess Shohei's not going anywhere. I'm just kidding. Could you imagine, though, like Ron Washington, like, I don't know, by the end of this offseason, maybe Trout is gone, Shohei's gone, and all he's left is the massive contract of Anthony Rendon. Poor guy. But that's how baseball go. Kyle, we're not talking about baseball. We're not really talking about college today. We are talking about church hopping. Church hopping. Yep. Kyle, pre-ministry, have you hopped a church? You and your family
pre-ministry
churches growing up?
No, I grew up in the same church my entire life until I went to college.
Okay.
So yeah, and now my grandparents went to another little bitty church, and so we would kind of go attend there occasionally, like for Easter and Mother's Day and stuff like that. So I kind of grew up in a weird way. I kind of grew up with two church families, but no, I mean, the church where I was baptized is the only church I was ever a member at until I went to college.
Well, this podcast, I don't know who it's going to be for. It's probably not for the people that are hopping churches. If that's you, don't. And unless it's like half of them, we'll talk about this. Is you were part of this because you went to college, so you went to a different church. So moving, that's one thing.
Right.
You ain't going to cross the country every Sunday for church. We get that. But most likely, depending upon a variety of issues, and we'll probably dive into those a little bit, you need to stay. And before we dive into some of the other reasons that people stay, I want to give just a word of encouragement. Statistically, it may not be you, Pastor, but there is a chance. And so one of the comics that I saw this morning when I hopped on Facebook is it had it was a cartoon, of course. So there were pews and people sitting on a pews, and the little caption said, "I'm not being fed." And the problem was in their hand was an iPhone or smartphone. And I was like, ooh. And of course, the people in the comments were like, maybe they're on a Bible app, or maybe they were surfing X or Facebook. But anyway, to dive into this a little bit, when churchgoers find a new congregation, most say their reasons for change had a little to do with both their old and new churches. So before we dive into the stats, Kyle, when you've had somebody leave, let's say First Alamogordo or another church, I don't want to open up any old wounds, but what were some of the reasons that you were told?
Let's see. One time I was told that we were too big, and we were running about 60. Now to put some context in there, this gentleman had older gentleman, he had just broken up with his older girlfriend, who was also a part of our church. So that wasn't the reason that was given, but let's all be honest. that was the reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then heard the you don't preach the Bible. I was told that one time. Um, Even though went
You
verse
did.
by verse through text.
Sometimes even
Um,
reading the entire text. That was always
that's true. I did that from time to time. I have no regrets about that. Um, yeah, and then the standard. As people said here, I'm just not being fed here. I'm not making connections here. Um, which you don't want to downplay those. I mean, and as a pastor, those things always hurt. Um, but when someone says, I will offer this caveat. When someone says they're not being fed and they're only showing up about once a month, that's
I'm not being
you do have to
fed,
ask
but I
yourself:
skip a meal
am
every
I the
4 days.
problem? Yes. Am I the problem here? Yeah. So I've heard all those. How about you, Matt?
Yeah, so a common one for me, certainly early on in some revitalization efforts was a common one. So was we don't have anything for our kids, and
Mm,
we had things for their kids. What they ultimately meant is we didn't have other kids, and so especially those that are in smaller churches, it's hard to for lack of a better word, compete with the church
right.
that has a thriving kids ministry or student ministry with a lot of things going on. If yours is led by a volunteer that can't do much more than maybe Bible study, not because of skill, but because of time, maybe they work, something like that. So they do the Sunday school thing and maybe a youth camp in the summer, but that's kind of about it because of just the situation that they're in and the situation that your church is in. So I heard that a little bit. And because of those that may be tuning in, I won't share some of the others to protect the guilty. But anyway, I've heard a few, and we've of course got several, and they're like, our pastor's really short, big Rangers fan. He's kind of terrible, and so we want to try a new church. No, I'm just kidding. I don't think I had anybody that left Alamogordo and First Alamogordo to come to ours. I did have people from
No,
Alamogordo, but not your church.
right.
But so let's talk a little bit about what the stats say. So things, nothing for my kids, or they don't have their friends, or most of their friends go to this church. I have heard that recently, at
Yeah.
least as a reason for one of our church members at First Farmersville to go to another area church that's going to be quite the haul for them. About 40 minutes, maybe 30 to 40 minutes, but a lot of their friends from school go to that church, and so they want to be part of the youth group there, that kind of deal.
Mm,
But statistics say U.S. regular churchgoers say they have attended more than one church as an adult at 53%. So
mm.
more than half, just barely over half, have attended at least one, and obviously more than one. And among those that switch churches, 63% say they regularly attended 2 to 3, 22% have attended 4 to 5, and then 6 to 7 churches was at 8%, 8 to 9 at
Wow.
3%, and 10 or more at 4%. And unless you are in the military, that number needs to go down. So stop at 10, just don't go anymore. Not let me rephrase that. Don't go to any more churches. That's not what I meant. Don't go to another church. Like, stay where you're at. Quit going. You're running the stats. But for those changing churches, changing homes was a factor. 3 and 5 church switchers. That's a much nicer way to say it than I said church hoppers. 60% say a residential move impacted their decision to leave their previous church and begin attending a new one. So let's kind of take that off the table. You served at First Alamogordo, a very transient population because of the military base. So you would kind of get some folks 2 to 3 years, and then they go to their next deployment or whatever it might be. That's normal. That's
Yeah.
unavoidable. When I served a church in Las Colinas, it was similar, but for a different reason. It was like young pros, and they would kind of get established at an engineering firm or something like that in the Las Colinas area, and then would move on and move up to churches, or not churches, but towns like or states like California, or would go to Austin, Houston, some of that kind of stuff. And so we would lose people 2 to 3 years, and but it was because of a move. So let's kind of take that off the table, and let's talk about some of the reasons that other people are moving churches, those that don't leave and don't move to another area. That's 40%. So let's kind of dive into that. 1 in 4 church switchers say they changed because some things changed about the church they did not like. 29%. My advice to you is it's not about you. No, let's talk about that one a little bit. Kyle, 1 in 4 say they changed because something changed about their church that they didn't like. Now, that could be a number of things, couldn't it?
Yeah.
Music style. It could be maybe a changing demographic. It could be a number of things. Change the bulletin. The reasons could be myriad. So let's talk about that, Kyle. When might that be okay? Let's talk about that first. When would that be okay?
Yeah, I mean, so 1 in 4 say they because of something they didn't like. Man, I mean that like you mentioned, there's not really enough information there to go. Um, so okay, let's say that you know, a significant ministry is being eliminated, or so if it's a you know um, if it's like say a ministry to senior adults, and this is a senior adult, and it's suddenly, hey, we're not going to do this ministry at all. Like we're just eliminating this ministry altogether. So in other words, a lot of times churches will focus on young families, but if you focus on young families to the exclusion of everyone else, you're probably going to lose some people, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, if they no longer feel like they are being ministered to, um, that's a yeah that could be an issue.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Man,
go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, if where it's not always great is when it's just a preference. Maybe depending upon the preference. Obviously you and I are expository preachers, and
Yeah,
if you really felt like topical preaching, that kind of thing is more your cup of tea, a church like ours and First Farmersville, First Alamogordo, when you were there, Mayhill, probably wasn't going to be for you. Now, I would argue that if you're after topical preaching, that kind of thing, and it can be done exegetically faithful, all of that kind of stuff. I'm not just teeing off on that. But when you go through books of the Bible, you still cover all of those topics without the risk of offending the people just because you picked on them in their recent divorce or something like that. But
yeah,
if that was the case, and certainly if the reverse was true, if maybe you are hungry and prefer exegetically faithful verse by verse preaching, and you get a new pastor, or your pastor decides to do the movie sermon series or something, maybe
yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's fair. But other preferences like music, for example, I want to just share something. I don't know who it's helpful for, but I'd recently shared it with a team that was meeting. That I have been to churches that had the smoke machine, the lights, the contemporary, all of that kind of stuff, and the music that they were doing contemporary wise was theologically sound, all of that kind of stuff, and they were reaching young people, old people. It was shoulder to shoulder, and done really well. And I've been to churches like St. Andrew's Presbyterian, and maybe a little different because it was a celebrity that was preaching there at the time, the late R.C. Sproul, that was as high church as you could get.
Mm,
Full orchestra, organ, responsive readings that lasted longer than Bart Barber sermon intros. It was very, very, very high church, and it was just as young people, old people, everything in between, shoulder to shoulder. And then I've been in churches that had contemporary music and was sparsely attended, very little, any
yeah,
engagement whatsoever, and churches that were very traditional and very sparsely attended, all of those kinds of things. But what sticks out to me the most is the church that I served in Valley Ranch or Las Colinas. We were pretty contemporary. Obviously, we did hymns usually, but more like the Indelible Grace style, where it still sounded
Yeah.
contemporary, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, we did that, and we had nearly towards the front, right in the middle, a much older couple, like late 70s, early 80s, empty nesters, all of that kind of stuff. They were our oldest family, probably by about 40 years.
Mm.
And they were there, and they had their hands up and all of that kind of stuff, were super engaged and all of that. And one day we're talking, and they let in with a little secret that I had no idea. We don't like the music here, but we feel called here, and
Wow.
you're doing it well, and we want to, set an example for some of these younger families and pour into them and disciple them. This isn't my preference, but this is
Mm.
where we feel called, and that has
Wow.
stuck with me ever since. And
Yeah.
so I just say that as a caveat that, there's contemporary done well, there's traditional done well, there's contemporary done not so well, traditional done not so well, all of that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, as long as that music, the preaching, all of that kind of stuff is biblically faithful, you really need to think through, are your preferences getting in the way of you being involved and setting an example on
Yeah.
all kind of stuff in a church that needs you. And so, I don't know if you want to respond to that at all, or if we move on, but go ahead.
No, I think you're right. Like, so, I mean, here's the thing: you're never going to find a church that does everything exactly the way you like it, right? And so there's always going to be something that you would probably prefer to happen a different way. And I can tell you, having served as pastor at a couple of churches, even your pastor, there's a couple of things that are happening in your church that you would probably prefer to go that would go a different way, right? So this goes back to the simple fact that when you gather, it's not about you,
Yeah.
right? At all. It's not about you. It's about meeting together with other believers, and you got to find a church where you can worship alongside other believers, where you're being fed, where the word is being proclaimed, where ministry is happening, and and really that's it. Those are the requirements, right? A church that preaches the Bible, that loves its people, that's seeking to reach its community, and you're never going to find the perfect church. In fact, I think it was Spurgeon who said, if you found the perfect church, you shouldn't go there because you would ruin
Yeah. Well,
it.
let me list all of the ways that First Farmersville isn't my preference. And it starts with the meet and greet. I'm just kidding. So number two, or the next one, 29% equal. 29%, the church was not fulfilling their needs or reasons for attending a church. Now, of course, this is loaded. What are their reasons
Right.
for attending church? Is it business connections and they just didn't have that there? That's probably
Yeah.
not great. Is it their needs for something for their children? And I I have a soft spot for this, obviously, with kids, and certainly being the guy that created kids ministries at the churches that we went, just because there weren't really young families, that kind of thing. So I get it. Uh, so it's a factor, but also think of how you could be a part of leveraging that change itself, of plugging into those areas and meeting those needs itself. But you touched on it earlier. If you're going once a month or twice a month and you're not being fed or whatever it is, there's a mirror staring at you,
Yeah.
and you might want to look at it pretty deeply. What are maybe some other needs that would be worthwhile to consider?
Yeah. I mean, so, if you were going through a really tough stretch and like you don't feel like your church has been ministering to you, right? Like, I mean, if your pastor never shows up when you're in the hospital or sick, or when after the loss of a loved one, like if you're never checked on, okay, I have a little bit of sympathy for like those kind of situations, right? Where there's like a major disruption life event, and um, there's no real care that's given there. Um, that and then maybe that goes to the next one too, right? They became disenchanted in some ways with the pastor. But most of the time, at least in my experience, when someone says, their needs are it's not fulfilling their needs, that as you mentioned, that's a two-way street. And most of the time when that came up, it was somebody who was really on the fringe of attendance, and they were not plugged in, they were not building relationships. And so, yeah, they probably did feel disconnected
Yeah.
from the church because, well, they were in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I think if you're a church member, maybe thinking through this, think long and hard about those needs. Are they not being fulfilled because of something the church is doing that maybe you've sought to address and some of that kind of, or not doing, or whatnot, or is it because of your involvement? You got to think through
Yeah.
that honestly. And then like you touched on, 27% disenchanted in some ways with the pastor. um, if that's something like homeboys up there in sneakers instead of dress shoes, or didn't wear a
Yeah.
tie one week, something like that, yeah, that's not a biblical reason for it. If your mom died and your son has cancer or something like that, and he's completely disconnected and not shepherding you, or the church isn't, maybe you're
Yeah.
a large church of 10,000 people, the pastor's probably not going to be the one that's able to make each and every one of those types of things, but uh save that. Yeah, that's something to consider. And then also, of course,
Right.
disadvantage with the church. 26% have said that, and maybe that, of course, we saw a lot of that with COVID.
Yeah. Sure.
Maybe they did require masks, they didn't, pastor dared talk about a vaccine or didn't, whatever it might be. And that goes into 22 also. Percent say they could not agree with some of the church's teachings or positions on issues or politics. And that could be, just to give fair warning, that could be because they don't want the pastor diving into that stuff at all. It could be because the pastor is far right. It could be because the pastor is far left. That's a mixed bag. And 1 in 5, 20% say they felt out of place at their previous church, just really
Mm.
not connected. And again, did you pursue that? Were there avenues
Yeah.
for you to be involved, and you didn't take those for you? And you touched on another one. A life situation caused them to stop attending. Verse 18, or not verse
Yeah.
18, 18%. And so maybe you had a divorce and your ex is there, and that would just be kind of awkward. Or
Yeah.
you had a death, and this other church has a grief share program and you could be a part of it, or all of those kinds of things are myriad. And so we've touched on it a little bit. 13% COVID were
Yeah.
issues. 11% there was some conflict. 9% beliefs or attitudes toward church and religion change. Maybe they were no longer Baptist or whatever.
Mm.
2% said they found a new church because the previous one closed. 23% say they stopped attending for other reasons. So that's the stats in a nutshell. Let's talk to the pastors, Kyle. What can we learn when somebody leaves for one of these reasons?
Well, so if you can do some sort of an exit interview with someone, I would always highly recommend it. You might not get honesty. To be completely honest, been there too, where you knew there was something else going on, and they just weren't saying it. From each of these, right? You're going to learn. Um, Sometimes it is you. Sometimes it is you in your church because you've made mistakes. Maybe you neglected something, not out of malice, but just out of busyness and distraction, and you failed to minister to somebody when they really needed it. It Sometimes it's more on the other person, right? As a mentor of mine like to say, the problem is not the problem. Sometimes there's something else going on in their lives that will um, show itself in frustration toward their church. So oftentimes it's going to be some sort of combination of both, right? So I would say in these you need to learn to own what you need to own. If you've made mistakes, you need to. I mean, look, confess, apologize, ask for forgiveness. That might not mean they stay in your church, but it might mean that there's not a relationship that's destroyed. Um, and here's the thing, right? You're going to make mistakes. No pastor is perfect. Not even um, His Holiness Bart Barber himself, right? No pastor is perfect. You are going to make mistakes, and so own those when you need to. Um, but also as we've seen here, there are a number of reasons why people leave churches. Um, it's not always your fault. In fact, I would say most of the time there's something else going on that you're probably not going to know about, maybe for a long time. So don't let someone leaving your church devastate you.
Yeah.
Because there's probably something else going on in that situation.
Yeah. And remember a couple of things. One, to find your identity in Christ, not how many people you have there, or let somebody leaving just crush you because you feel like a failure, things like that. You can still learn from those things and use them for opportunities to grow. I would say kind of take this list of things changing. Not a whole lot that you can do about that, but hey, especially with revitalization, there's necessary change that needs to happen. Go slow. Many of us want to lead the church that we want and we dream of, and so we try to get to that as quick as possible. When the old cliche, it's a marathon, not a sprint, it plays into this. Take that change slow. Y'all talk about tactical patience a lot. There's also times where rapid change is necessary, just because of the list could be limitless for why that would be necessary for you to make a rapid, hard turn into something. But keep that in mind with the changes. Take those things slow. As far as not fulfilling needs or reasons for attending church, that kind of thing. Look, the best you can do is have stuff available and in the bridges built to people, opportunities for them to have relationships with others. Make that intentional. Opportunities for the various Sunday schools to fellowship with one another. If you have two services, ways for them to be connected with other relationships in the church beyond just the people sitting next to them. Things like that. Disenchanted with some way with the pastor, again, you're going to do something. Somebody's going to get upset, but there's also low-hanging fruit that you can avoid, and that is striving to make those hospital visits and make those personal home visits and things like that. If you're never doing that and people leave because of that, like, that's on you, brother. Like, you need to take some time to pastorally care for your people beyond just the Sunday morning stuff. Agreeing with some of the church's teachings or positions or politics, that kind of thing. Bro, be careful. We're going into an election season. It's going to be difficult. You are going to make people mad because there's people that strongly believe how they believe, and maybe you don't address them, things like that. You may not need to change, but just be careful, be wise there. Feeling out of place, again, make opportunities for people to be involved. Change in life situation. Again, some of those things you can't really avoid. But hey, in as much as it depends on you, live at peace with everybody. And so try to learn from these things. Don't just get defeated and crushed and feel like you're a failure because of it. Use them as an opportunity to grow and learn from, and maybe try not to let that happen again. That would be my advice there. To the church member that's listening into this, unless gross sin or clear departure from biblical teaching, that kind of deal, you probably ought to stay where you're at. Again, there's some caveats that could be made, but most likely you need to stay. Plug in, be a part of the change you want to see and so forth, and pursue those relationships. If you feel a little disconnected, connect, like go to the events, be a part of things. Our church is super busy. So anybody that would ever say they feel disconnected there or they don't have relationships, that's probably going to be on them. Go to those things. This Saturday, a church member is doing a fireworks party. Will be filled with church members and people from the community. Great opportunities offered up for us, on a silver platter to be involved. That kind of a deal. Plug in. But if you do need to leave, plug in there. Don't compare that guy to the last guy. Give him a fair shot. All of those kinds of things. But yeah, barring a move, barring major departure from biblical teaching and orthodoxy, stay. And that would be my encouragement to you. Kyle, any other final thoughts?
No, I think you hit it. look for reasons to stay, not reasons to leave. That's super important.
Yeah. All right. Well, send us out, Kyle. Do you remember the outro? I've done it the last couple of times.
I think so. I think I'll try this. Hey, thanks for listening, and until next time, may your coffee be as black as night and as bold as the gospel you declare.
What's wrong with you people?